Christian sites in Jerusalem, for instance, the Wailing Wall. Is it holy to Christians? Is it a place of worship or of religious significance to Christians? I'm sorry to be so ignorant about that.
Could you add to your question also briefly your name?
My name is Eddie Meiri. I'm from Israel.
Okay, it's an interesting question because it touches upon how do Christians define holy places. But to say very briefly, in order not to get into all the complexity of the circles of holy places with their significance, when it comes to the Western Wall and the places that signify where the temple once stood, of course they are of great interest to Christians. A, Jesus went there, and B, because Christians today underline the very important relationship with the Jewish people. So you will find more and more Christian pilgrims visiting both the Western Wall and the Haram al-Sharif for those two reasons. One, we are called to visit those places where Jesus visited, and two, we are called to engage both with Jews and with Muslims in terms of their present religious practice.
The gentleman to my right.
Excuse me, may I have a follow-up question?
Sorry, we really have a few more questions. Maybe at the end there will be opportunity. Thank you. To my right. So,
to hear you say that you have no claim.
He wants to hear that we have no claim. Should I say that?
Giorgio Sacerdoti from Italy. We have here two religious leaders. I see a tension between what both said of the spiritual dimension of Jerusalem in both Catholic, Christian, and Jewish tradition, and also Muslim, and the political requests of the two sides. So both Israel and the Palestinian claim that Jerusalem should be the political capital, which makes, of course, the questions quite more complicated. But is it envisageable also in the Jewish tradition that one thing is saying the city is the ideal center of Judaism, or its home birth of Christianity and one of the saint cities of Islam? That doesn't imply necessarily that the political center, the capital, and would include the whole of the city as each tradition sees it. So I would like, from your perspective, to hear something like that. There are many important states in the world where the central city is not necessarily the political capital, and some Washington or Brasilia was built to put the government there. Thank you.
So I just received a little advice from my rabbi colleague that I should state very, very clearly that the Catholic Church does not make any kind of political claim of sovereignty on any part of the land of Israel. This is not a question of laying claim to territory. The interesting move has been from an insistence on putting Jerusalem outside of the conflict, internationalizing it, not under the sovereignty of the Church, of course, but under the sovereignty of some international body. And in recent years, particularly spurred by the optimism that I think most of us shared, that in the beginning and mid-90s it looked as if Israelis and Palestinians were going to be able to negotiate and arrive at some kind of conclusive agreement. And there the Church has kept to that formulation of saying, and I'll put it in my words, send it to the Vatican and ask if I'm saying it correctly, we don't have a problem with Jerusalem being the capital of Israel or the capital of Palestine. What we would really like is that there be negotiations that decide what would the status be. Until that time, we abide by international law. And so I think that that would be the position of the Vatican today.
Thank you, Erwin. Danny Reisner.
Yes, thank you.
I want to answer Rabbi Rosen.
Okay. So
Please briefly.
I'll try and my chairman has asked me to be brief. So let me just tell you a very quick story. A couple of weeks ago, I was asked to attend an interview by British media with Rabbi Amar, who used to be the Sephardi chief rabbi of Israel and today is the rabbi of Jerusalem, the Sephardi chief rabbi of Jerusalem. And so I'm going to tell you Rabbi Amar's response to almost the identical question. And he said to this interview, and it's more interesting that it's Rabbi Amar's response than that it's my response. He said to him, Judaism teaches nothing about the question of sovereignty. There is no religious obligation to be sovereign. We wish to be able to live in Jerusalem and to venerate its holy places according to our own particular tradition. But we have no reason on the basis of experience to have any confidence that we will be able to do so under anybody else's sovereignty.
Reverend Neuhaus, I'm going to ask you a variation of the same question I asked Rabbi Rosen. You repeated several times that Jerusalem should be for the three religions, but in reality it's about 35, if I count correctly. Each one a variation of a theme, both on the Jewish side, the Christian side, and even on the Muslim side there are quite a few variations. So my question to you is, what is the position of the Catholic Church to the other Christian elements inside the holy city of Jerusalem? And again, the same type of question. Is it receptive or is it... Yeah.
Okay, so I think that I touched upon that very briefly and maybe it went missing. And that is when the first Pope visited Jerusalem in modern times, Pope Paul VI, he came and created a symbol of what the dream of the Catholic Church would be, and we would like to impose that dream on all other Christians, and that is unity. He came to meet here Athenagoras, and Pope Francis, 50 years later, gave as the principal reason for coming the memorial of that meeting with Athenagoras and met here with Bartholomew. We would like to believe, of course, you would need to ask the other Christians if what I'm saying has any relevance or not. We would like to believe that we are concerned with the holy places that are central to all Christians and speaking out the interests of all the churches. Whether we do that effectively or not, I'm not the right person to be asking.
Any more questions? The lady, I don't know your name, but if the microphone can be passed to the lady, almost in the last row. Yeah. And Morel, then, of course.
Hi, I'm Nancy Karkowski. I'm from Silver Spring, Maryland, right outside Washington, D.C. in the United States. A comment and then a question. First, the comment is that Jerusalem, I'm not a rabbi, I'm not a priest, I am a lawyer. But Jerusalem was established as the political capital of Israel. When David established Jerusalem, it was as his seat of government. That just is the way that is history. That's in the Tanakh. That's my comment. My question is, since both speakers have spoken expansively on the need for us to all work towards tolerance and pluralism, and that our city that the city of Jerusalem, our wonderful city of Jerusalem, become a place for all religions and all people. And I would say there's probably more than 35 variations of the different religions, not just Christians, Muslims, and Jews. Everyone should be able to feel comfortable praying in this spiritual place. So wouldn't a very good way to start that process be if all people of all faiths or any faith is allowed to meditate or pray on the Temple Mount?
So if you'll allow me, I'm going to turn your first comment into a question, because I think that what you said, which is indisputable in the biblical narrative, we should not forget is a biblical narrative that is reflected on and owned not only by Jews, but by Christians and Muslims as well. We too meditate those texts. We pray Solomon's prayer of consecration of the temple. Muslims refer to David as prophet and king. So by citing an event that took place in the history, the religious history of the Jewish people, inevitably you are creating more trouble than giving a proof of some kind of claim, because we all recognize ourselves in that narrative, read of course very, very differently. When it comes to praying in the Haram al-Sharif, I think that we need a Muslim here to give us an answer to that. But I would say that one of the most central religious concerns of the churches, plural, although we don't like to speak of churches, we prefer to say the church, is the question of access. And again, you said you're a lawyer, but then you gave it a kind of spiritual slant. I'm going to put it back in legal terms, and that is, who is allowed to come to Jerusalem and who is left out of being allowed to come to Jerusalem? And I would here name three categories when it comes to free access. And this could be Jews, Muslims, and Christians, although for Jews it's not really an issue. But certainly for Muslims and Christians it is. One, a very real concern, which I understand, I'm an Israeli citizen too, the security issue of not allowing Palestinians from Palestine, from the occupied territories, from Yehuda v'Shomron, call it whatever you like, we know what we're talking about, to come to Jerusalem to pray. Okay? This is a very, very big issue. We understand what the complexity is, but we as church are very concerned about the access that our faithful have from Gaza, from Ramallah, from Nablus, from Bethlehem, to come to pray in the churches. Point number two, if you allow, I'll just finish the three groups that we are particularly concerned with. The group number two for us is very definitely the Christians who live in the surrounding Arab countries who don't have free access. Again, we understand why. We're not here in a debate about should we throw open the borders and let everyone in, but we are very concerned that it is so difficult to bring in our faithful from the surrounding Arab countries who before 1948 really saw Jerusalem as their spiritual center. And the third, and this has nothing to do with politics, but a lot to do with economics, we are very concerned about the fact that our faithful from poor countries can't easily come in to worship in Jerusalem. By the way, even on that issue, there is a wonderful Israeli movie, if you haven't seen it, I recommend it, from about 15 years ago, called James Goes to the Holy Land. Don't know how many have seen it, but it's an inspiring movie which has a very hard look at Israeli society. And one of the issues it deals with is the difficulty of bringing people from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America, from poor countries into Israel. Again, I share the concern. Some of them are poor and might stay here as illegal migrant workers and God knows what else. But we are primarily concerned with the religious identity of Jerusalem and what it symbolizes for millions of Christians throughout the world.
Thank you.
So thank you for asking the question. Are you giving me...
Rabbi Rosen, is this directly an answer to the previous question? So I would like to prefer to have you answered briefly and directly.
As opposed to Father David, I did not understand your first comment because it seemed to me that you were just stating what I had already stated. As I had mentioned that David established Jerusalem as his center and that it was a prototype, apropos what Mr. Sacerdoti mentioned earlier, that it was a prototype for Washington, D.C. and for Canberra. I don't understand what the relevance of that is to your question, but with regards to your question, the Supreme Court, as you know in Israel, has ruled time again on the principle of freedom of access to all sites and freedom of movement on principle, and therefore Israel has ruled in that particular regard. It is also important, of course, to know that the vast majority of rabbinic authority within the Orthodox world and the consistent position of the chief rabbinate of Israel is that it is categorically prohibited for Jews to go onto the Temple Mount. And therefore the religious position of the vast majority of the Jewish establishment is against such a proposal. But more important, excuse me?
I do beg your pardon, but it is definitely not the majority.
You can beg my pardon with pleasure, but it is definitely the majority, overwhelmingly and categorically, and it is the official position of the Chief Rabbinate of Israel. But more important is the very important response, as I've already quoted, one Sephardi Chief Rabbi of Israel, another one was Rabbi Bakshi Doron, the Sephardi Chief Rabbi, who was asked with regards to the question of those who want to go on to areas of the Temple Mount where historically it's clear that that was not the area that was originally prohibited. And in his wonderful text, which I'll be happy to share with you, he says, the idea that we can, therefore, he was asked, with regards to those who want to rebuild the temple. And he said, the idea that Jews attach with regards to this particular occasion has to do with the vision of the end of days. An era which our prophets view of an era of universal peace, where all nations, well, no nation will lift up sword against nation, and they will live and they will not learn war anymore. In other words, a world of genuine mutual respect. The very idea that we could advance our religious interests while causing alienation, pain, and even violence on the part of others should be a complete anathema to that idea. And that is why the governments of Israel on this issue have been sensible, and the police authorities have been sensible. It's not just a question of what is right. There was a great slogan on the part of the Israeli Council for preventing accidents on our roads. You know, we've killed many more of our own than all our enemies put together. And that slogan, wise slogan, understanding the Israeli psychology, is don't be right, be smart. And the approach towards the Temple Mount should not be one of be right. It's precisely the problem I was highlighting before. It is essential for us to be smart, and to be smart means to respect not only the attachments but the sensibilities of others, and not to bring, God forbid, a conflagration upon all of us, which would be to our ultimate destruction.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have to take a look on the watch, and we have elapsed time, so please let me apologize that we can only allow one more for the question, and I think Morel has been trying for a long time to make some remarks. And please, I would like to encourage you to use the break afterwards. I'm sure that Father Neuhaus and also Rabbi Rosen will stay a little bit with us, and you can continue to discuss. Morel.
My name is Merle Khan from Tel Aviv. My question really concerned about the practical aspects of this idea of internalization, because it's something that ideologically, I think we all agree it's something that we should strive for, and it's been on the table for a long time. So I was very happy to hear this discussion today. But particularly, my question was, how do we practically go about doing that? And I think that Father Neuhaus brought it up when he spoke about the ability of other Christians and other peoples to be able to come from the security standpoint. Obviously, this points out that there are many, many problems from a practical standpoint. That does not mean, I think, that we should still go ahead and advance it from the standpoint of ideology. Thank you.
Was this a question or only remarks? Then. Okay. Okay, so I will allow a really last question. Sorry, one last question, the lady, and then we would really need to continue.
Sarah Beiser from the United States. My question is, what is the Church's position on the UNESCO resolution which denied any Jewish connection to the Temple Mount, and thereby Christian connection?
So I think that before we go into that discussion, I think it would be very important to bring the text and look very closely at the text and not rely on the ideological interpretations of the text given by rather radical spokespeople on both sides.
You know, with all due respect, I don't think it's ideological to just get to what the position was. So it denied the Jewish connection and therefore the Christian connection.
I will not relate to the UNESCO because I think it's a misrepresentation of the UNESCO text. I will say very, very clearly that the Church recognizes absolutely the Jewish link to Jerusalem and to the area that Jews call the Temple Mount. At the same time, it recognizes absolutely the deep veneration and connection of Muslims to that site.
Did the church come out against the UNESCO resolution?
In the very terms that I've just said, yes.
Did the church make a public statement against the UNESCO resolution?
No, because I think you're misquoting the UNESCO text.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue with our next program, I would first of all like to very much thank you, Father Neuhaus and Rabbi Rosen, for this very, very thrilling discussion, and also, of course, you, ladies and gentlemen, from the podium. You can feel free to take a seat, and we will screen a short video from Professor Dan Bahad, whom I would like to briefly introduce to you.